All right, Bill. Well, you and I have been talking quite a bit recently about artificial intelligence, and we know it is a very useful tool. It's useful technology here, but there's obviously a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about how it will be used, what it will mean to really humankind, I guess, moving forward, right?
Yeah, and like anything, it attracts evil as well.
It does, it does. Now, artificial intelligence, I was reading this story out of the BBC here, I think it was last week. It says, set to affect nearly 40% of all jobs. Seeing AI likely going to worsen overall inequality here as a result as well. So is that true? How concerned should we be? How quickly could we start to see some of these trends actually take place? Well, we're joined on the line now by Eamonn O'Neill, the co-founder of Lemongrass, a software-enabled services provider synonymous with SAP on the cloud. Eamonn, good morning. How are you today?
I'm very well, folks. And how are you?
Doing well as well. Appreciate you taking some time to join us here and talk about this, because it's obviously a very hot topic here right now. And I guess I just want to get your overall initial thought on that statistic. 40% of all jobs could be impacted by AI here within the next decade. Does that sound true, or is that a little bit of fear-mongering going on here?
Well, I guess it depends what the word affected means. Mm-hmm. I think, everybody's seeing Gen AI, the ChatGPT type of AI, appear everywhere. And if it appears on your phone, well, then it's affected you, I guess. But probably more realistically, we will see a lot of careers, a lot of job types get impacted a bit more heavily than others. And certainly it'll be a big number. Whether it's 40% or not, I'm not quite sure how they calculate that. But there's no doubt that we're going to see a lot more AI in a lot more jobs, and certainly within the next 10 years.
So I guess, when we're talking about that, and that's like 1 out of every 2 people almost, right, is going to have to really adapt and learn to use this technology to their advantage and make it a useful tool for their environment here. What would be your, I guess, advice? I mean, I think last time I had you on, which was summer of last year, we just had a general talk about, artificial intelligence in general and ChatGPT and how people were using it. And I think one of the pieces of advice you had was just, hey, if you haven't started using it and playing around with it and just trying to get at least somewhat familiar with it, you better get on it, or you're going to kind of be left behind a little bit. Yeah,
and I think that still stands. There's nothing to be afraid of here. Is get stuck in, play with it, and get familiar with it. You can get familiar fairly quickly as well. And I think after a short period of time, you start to realize that it's a little bit like Google. If you're looking for an answer, if you're looking for some content, you might have different Google skills, if you like. You might be able to find things faster than others. But ultimately, you still rely on the massive corpus of information on the internet. You don't create a lot of that content yourself. You reuse what's there. And AI is very similar. It seems you have to create stuff sometimes, but you need to be comfortable using it to create that content. So I think that, again, I would go back to that earlier advice. It still absolutely stands. Nothing wrong with getting your hands stuck in and seeing what's there. And I think it actually will make you feel a bit more comfortable about things. It's not going to necessarily remove jobs completely. What it will do is it will make people more capable. It will give you the ability to do more. So one thing we've noticed is that, for example, when it comes to coding, we found that these tools can generate code very well. They're very impressive levels of quality, things like GitHub Copilot, etc. However, it doesn't mean that we don't need developers. What it does mean is that developers can do more with their day. They can get through different types of code, different types of challenges much more quickly. So that's the way to think about it. In the same way as Google has helped us do things more quickly, AI will also help us do things more quickly.
Now, I can see how it would affect developers greatly. But how about the common man, the common person that's out there? When we say 40%, and you said it depends on what affected. How could it be affected in a positive way for somebody who's driving a truck or who's working in a warehouse or something like that?
I think it'll make things very convenient. So, for example, if you're driving a truck, of course, things like the self-driving vehicles and how they can assist with driving so that maybe it's less stressful to drive Maybe you can go on autopilot for a period. We know that they're not fully autonomous yet, and that is some way off. But all of that capability is built on AI, different types of AI. So I think what you'll start to see is that it'll be more convenient to do certain things. You only need to look at your phone to see how responsive and how useful that is. If you're looking for something, if you speak to it, it understands your voice. That's AI. That's much more convenient than maybe typing in, especially if you're traveling or something. So you'll start seeing it pop up in areas where you'll suddenly realize that's much more convenient than it was before. And that's because AI has made it that way. So AI has allowed some of these interactions that were very difficult to program in the past, like image recognition, voice recognition, content creation. Those things were very, very difficult to program in the past. So, computers and phones weren't that good at it. But you'll start seeing them become very good at understanding what you're saying, responding in a voice that you understand, recognizing images, videos, and what's going on. So, I think, it's going to be a very broad set of impacts. But I think that the real kind of buzzword will be convenience. Things will be easier to do.
Yeah, you just said a broad impact because when you say artificial intelligence, it has a far more vast connotation than people just thinking, it's going to replace my job as a journalist, or it's going to replace my job doing this because it's a warehouse job and they'll just have robots doing it. It's a huge swath that it's really hard to get our heads around exactly how big it is.
Yeah, and it's just. Maybe another way to put it is it's just very advanced computing techniques. That's really all it is. And what computers have done for humans up to now is they've made it easier to do things. Robotics in, shop fronts or shop floors for car factories, etc. Yes, you could argue they've replaced some jobs, but they've also made the people who are using them much more effective. They can do a lot more. So I think that there's a whole range of different applications and different types of AI, but the one that everybody's sort of familiar with is the generative AI, the ChatGPT experience. And it's interesting. What I've seen is the real benefit of it that I see is, any creative person, a journalist like yourselves, or an artist, or a songwriter, or a coder, anybody who has to create things. The biggest problem they often have is a blank piece of paper. Where do I start? How do I get going? And that's where I've found Gen AI has been very powerful. But it doesn't give you the same quality as necessarily human, but it might give you a 60% starter. And then the human would tend to tailor that to something that's a bit more refined, maybe a bit more unique, maybe a bit better. But certainly that's what we see today, is that these are accelerators for people, not necessarily replacing them completely, but accelerating them so they can do more.
It's a great idea.
Wow.
Should probably start using it to start generating some ideas for our show. Sometimes we get sitting there stuck, and why not ask the computer to at least come up with a starting point for us? Yeah, that's a great thought. I did want to ask you, Eamonn, while we have you, just about the danger here. We heard a story today, and obviously deep fakes and things like this are a big concern, just generally speaking. And there was a story we read today where a family was scammed out of $170,000. It was a cryptocurrency scam. Now, they should have known better, I think, at the end of the day. But the reason they got caught was because there was a very reputable news source that someone just completely used the anchors and their set and deepfaked the whole thing about how this investment opportunity, you can't miss it. And that's really what got them, is they thought they were watching a very reputable source. And obviously they weren't. It was not even a real video of anything. So how concerning should we be about the future of not being able to tell what's real and what's fake? And how much do you think government in countries across the world really need to get ahead of this here?
Well, there's the old saying that you should believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. And, I've seen the deepfakes as well. And they're so good, they're so compelling that it's very easy to find yourself believing them. But I've got to the point now where most of the content on the internet, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or whatever other application you see, you've got to almost assume it's fake. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to believe that these things are a credible source anymore. And even if it's branded from a reputable source, sometimes you just got to be skeptical. Of course, not everybody can do that, and it's difficult to live in that kind of world, of course. So, people do look to authorities to lay down some guidelines, some controls. But I believe it's going to be incredibly difficult to do. Now, of course, you could always stop people from trying to be malicious if you can identify them. The difficulty on the internet, of course, is that many people can stay anonymous through VPN, through remote access. It's very difficult to know who's putting these things up. So, I think it's difficult to expect governments to really to solve this problem. I think the only real way is for people to double down on their cynicism about what they're seeing on the internet, and hopefully just avoid these things. Now, I have to say that there are some areas which I think everybody listening would probably want the ensure government is getting involved in, the police are getting involved in, around child protection, of course. Mm-hmm. But I do know that there's a range of things around how real are political reports, how real are financial reports. Those sort of things are just going to be really, really difficult to police.
Now, I have to ask this one, being a science fiction fan and being paranoid about everything. Now, what are the chances of this ever getting too far, like HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey, or the Terminator movies, where artificial intelligence just takes over, we can't control it anymore, and mankind comes to an end?
It's funny, yeah. I have been asked that question a few times.
Yeah, I bet.
Actually, I think it's a very low likelihood, certainly in our lifetimes, that we'll see anything like that. Not only do you find that the people who are leading the AI side of things are really paying attention to the ethical use of it and the kind of guardrails they can put around it, but I also think that the technology isn't that good yet, and I don't think it's even close to being that good, where it could be autonomous and it could, develop some sort of selfish driver that would harm anybody. So, I definitely read all the science fiction stories like you have as well. But I think this technology is, in some ways, it's really impressive. In other ways, it's also just a tool. It's just like another thing that we will use. And I expect in 5-10 years' time, we'll probably all look back at AI and sort of laugh that we thought it was going to be so disruptive and dangerous. I think it's going to be just like every other technology. It's going to be very helpful. It'll increase productivity for people. It'll make life more convenient for everyone. But it's not going to be anywhere close to being human intelligence.
Well, I think that's a nice positive way to wrap things up.
Good way to end it up for a paranoid guy like me.
Thanks so much for this, Eamonn. Really appreciate the time, and definitely going to call you up and do it again down the line here. But great conversation as always. Appreciate you doing this.
Look forward to it, folks. Have a good morning.